Hi, and welcome to the MSU Denver Aviation Aerospace Department video series. My name is Emily Dolezal, and I'm the Aviation Aerospace Academic Advisor here at MSU Denver.
And I'm Chad Kendall, Professor of Aviation and Aerospace Science.
In this video, we'll cover the extra cost for your FAA flight certifications for our Professional Flight Officer program and how to strategically use financial aid. We're joined today by Dr. Joshua Bowens, an MSU Denver financial aid counselor, to help us make sense of all of this. To get started, Chad, can you please talk about the additional cost for the Professional Flight Officer program on top of tuition and fees?
Absolutely. In our program here at MSU Denver, we take students with no experience or flight training and prepare them to go into industry as commercial pilots, whether that be into the airlines, corporate cargo, or even military. And so in our program, in addition to the 120 credit hours for our bachelor's degree, you're doing flight training. So, a unique program where you're taking a pilot ground school class, you're taking other aviation classes, you're taking general studies classes, and then you're flying. You're earning your pilot certificates and ratings as you go through the program. And there's a very specific sequence that is done. And so for private pilot training, we have a ground school and we have a flight course. So starting this coming fall, it's actually required flight courses. There's a private pilot flight course, an instrument flight course, commercial single engine, CFI, multi-engine add-on, as well as other elective flight courses that students can pursue in addition to their required courses. So students will sign up for these flight courses as part of their degree program. They are actually classes. They're 2 credit hours. And the course is kind of like an internship. You at the airport, the student at the airport flying is the class. So meeting with your instructor out at the airport 2 to 3 times a week is the class. We help you at the beginning for that class for academic purposes to get registered for the course. And then you determine, and we've got another video series on where to do flight training at. And we're happy to meet with students on making a game plan on where to do flight training at. And then students get a S for satisfactory for completing that flight course, or an incomplete if they don't happen to finish in one semester and then bleed over a little bit into the other semesters. So that's kind of how the academics work on those courses. As well as with the courses, there are optional financial assistance. If students need additional assistance in funding their flight training, which is a part of the process. Flight training is an investment beyond just normal tuition. And the cost can be variable depending on types of flight training that you do, depending on how often you fly. Flying is a skill. We want students to fly often, so that way that will save them time and save them costs for flight training. And so we'd like to talk to students on ways to save costs while flight training, but it definitely is a cost beyond tuition. And there's a lot of variability to that cost, but that cost is an investment to our students and their careers and goals. And so after I help students register for those courses, then I send them to financial aid. And this is where Joshua Bowens and financial aid comes in to help students with the rest of the process and what students are going to see and talk about and hear from his aspect of the financial aid office. So we're going to talk about an example. We're going to talk about an example where a student is signing up for a private pilot flight course. And in our program, that's AES 1500. And so students who are coming in with no flight training at all, they're going to sign up for, like I said, a ground school. They're going to sign up for this flight course as well as some other classes their first semester. But they sign up for this flight course with 2 credit hours. And then I send them to Joshua Bowens in financial aid, as well as others in financial aid office, to then talk about the financial aid side.
Yeah. Thank you. So Joshua, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role here at MSU Denver?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Joshua Bowens. I am a financial aid counselor here in the Office of Financial Aid. And my role is to be able to sit down with students and help them to figure out how they're going to pay for both their classes, also indirect costs potentially like room and board, as well as the flight courses.
Yeah, so if you want to just dive right in and talk about how students can help use financial aid to pay both for those tuition and fees as well as those flight courses on top of that.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, these are just going to be general terms, and each student's account is very different. So it's really important to understand the basics of how financial aid works, but make sure that you make an appointment with the financial aid office with myself or another counselor to look at how financial aid assistance may be able to specifically help you in the aerospace program. So first off, cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is the average price for one academic year. For us, it's split into two different terms, the fall and the spring. And it's not the actual price that you pay, but it's an estimated cost of what a successful term and year may cost. So this includes things like the direct costs like tuition and fees, as well as indirect costs as transportation, books and supplies, room and board, and even your flight courses. So on the financial aid side, we can only add financial aid of whatever kind, whether it's federal loans, private loans, grants, scholarships, etc., up to the cost of attendance. It's kind of like a bucket of water. So we can only fill the bucket up to the top before nothing else can fit into that bucket. We'll get into more about how that works later. But let's talk about dependency status. Dependency, it really depends on their dependency status. A student might be eligible for more loans or less loans. So if you are a dependent student, you're going to need to have your parents' tax information, and thus you're going to be receiving less federal funds than an independent student. Generally speaking, you're considered a dependent student if you're under 24 years of age, unmarried, and have no dependents. So to determine how much federal aid a student can get, we take into account your dependency status and your EFC, or your expected family contribution. So the numbers based on your tax information that you put on the FAFSA, generally speaking, the lower the EFC, the more federal aid like grants you're able to receive. But it's really important to note, though, that receiving federal financial aid does not necessarily mean that your balance is going to be covered, especially when it comes to the aerospace program. So there is a limit to how much federal aid that a student can take out per semester and per year. So let's take a look at this example. This student here is a dependent freshman student with a 0 EFC. So based on that, the maximum amount that they can get with loans and grants is $7,499 per semester. As you can see, the cost of attendance is $12,500. So including the direct costs like tuition and fees and the indirect costs like books and supplies, room and board, etc. That means that they're going to be short about $5,000 for the semester all in. Granted, your situation might be a little bit different, say if you live with your parents and they take care of your room and board, or maybe your insurance. But generally speaking, this is what it costs for a student to be successful all in. Now, if you look at the second example, if we add in the cost of the flight lab or any of the other flight courses or lessons, the cost of attendance just skyrocketed to $24,500 or potentially more depending on what class you're taking. So that means, using the same example, this student still only has $7,499 in financial aid. So how can you make up the difference between what you'll owe for both the MSU Denver classes and your flight classes and how much financial aid you can receive? In other words, how can you fill your bucket to the top when you only get a certain amount of federal financial aid? The chances are you're gonna have to go find some financial assistance outside of the federal assistance, like private loans or scholarships. But in order to maximize the amount of that additional aid that can be applied to your account, you need to have a bigger bucket. So essentially, the bigger the cost of attendance, the more additional funds that can be added. So going back to that first example, there was only enough room in that bucket for an additional $5,000 before we reach the top, and we can't add anything else in. But if a student's taking a $12,000 flight course, getting a loan, an additional loan or a scholarship for just the $5,000 more, that's not going to be enough to cover the costs of everything for that semester. So to make the cost of attendance bigger, that is to be able to get more financial aid to cover what the federal finances won't cover, you need to fill out the aerospace budget form. And this will be like taking your bucket filled with water or financial aid and pouring it into a bigger bucket. We didn't give you any more federal financial aid, but now there's more room in your bucket to be able to get additional aid from somewhere else. So what are some of the additional private loan options? If you're a dependent student, your parent can apply for what's called a Parent Plus loan, and they can apply for that at www.studentaid.gov. You can also talk with your bank or credit union about private student loans, as sometimes they have really good deals for customers. And finally, for your loans, you can also compare and contrast 18 different loan servicers, and apply to any of them at www.elm, like the tree, ELM, select.com. So loans are obviously accrue interest, and they have to be paid back. So alternatively, you can search for some scholarships to help cover the cost. Some great scholarship search engines that you can look for some scholarships are FastWeb, FASTWEB, Chegg, CHEGG, Scholly, SCHOLLY, and Scholarship Owl. Now, I'll have Professor Kendall talk to you more about aviation-specific scholarships.
Thank you, Joshua. It's great that students have this information where a student signs up for a flight course, they understand the academics of it, they can elect to meet with you and get additional financial assistance. There's other means in which students can fund flight training. Some students pay cash by working or funding through family members to pay for their flight training. Other students need the financial assistance like you were talking about, so they sign up for, all students sign up for the flight courses, but if they need the financial assistance, then they need to fill out that aerospace budget form and then meet with you to raise that bucket and then to be able to access additional financial aid. But I always start off with, just like you were talking about, Joshua, and that's scholarships and students putting in the work. There's a lot of legwork, a lot of research to determine scholarships that are applicable to our students. And there are many scholarships out there. There are scholarships that can be used not in addition to tuition, but also towards flight training. So there are aviation-specific scholarships through student organizations like Women in Aviation, like Latino Pilots Association, other organizations that we have on campus, scholarships through for-profit and non-for-profit companies. And so students can just do the work. Google search aviation scholarships, meet with a faculty advisor to be able to get some other specific scholarships that they can then apply for. And we're happy in the department to, as a faculty advisor, and the rest of our faculty department, to work with students to make sure that they're filling out applications correctly. If applications require a reference or a letter of recommendation, then we're happy to provide those as well. But students can pursue those scholarship opportunities and then be able to apply those, not only, like I said, to tuition, but also for flight training as well.
Thank you. I'll also just put a quick plug in for our MSU Denver scholarship application found on the scholarships website of our financial aid office. That's a great way. And we do all have some aviation specific scholarships on there, as well as a lot of other different scholarships. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Bowens. Appreciate it. We absolutely will have students come visit you to talk about their specific individualized financial aid packages. Thank you guys so much for joining our video series today. We hope that a lot of these, we were able to answer a lot of the questions that you may have about funding for those flight hours. It can be a little bit of a sticker shock when you look at the cost of your college degree with those flight hours included. But as Professor Kendall mentioned, definitely think of it as an investment in yourself, your education, and your profession. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you in our program soon.